Russian drone attacks against Ukraine have more than doubled in recent months. And unfortunately, just yesterday, the United States halted all future shipments of air defense assets to Ukraine. So needless to say, the Russians are celebrating, saying this is likely to help them in the war even sooner. Now, there's a couple graphs I want to share here to help kind of set the stage as to why this arguably could not have happened at a worse time for Ukraine. The first one here from the Ukrainian Air Force showing the 5 largest aerial attacks carried out by Russia since the war began more than 3 years ago. And you'll notice the 5 largest were all in June, just in the last 30 days. The largest one yet happening just 3 days ago on June 29, 2025, when Russia launched 537 drones and missiles into Ukrainian territory. The majority of those are drones, the long-range Garan-style or Shahid-style drones. I believe 60 in that specific barrage were missiles. So we can see that the Ukrainian need for air defense assets and interceptors is not going down. It's not even staying the same. It is increasing day by day, week by week, month by month. And I think that point is driven home in another graph here put together by Megan Mobbs, the president of the RT Weatherman Foundation, where she shows that just in June alone, Russian drone strikes went up 188%. And you can see this steady increase month after month. And she actually has it broken out here. The red is President Trump since he came into office, the blue, President Biden. There's a couple different ways to look at that there for what it's worth. One, this December-January timeframe is right about when we expected that Russia had developed a lot of domestic procedures to churn out a lot more drones, manufacture a lot more drones themselves. So if they are able to make more, they're probably going to launch more. And then again, this is one data point, so I'd be skeptical to read too much into it in any direction. We've already seen the arguments that Putin increased attacks because he doesn't feel like Trump is going to do anything about it. The other argument that Putin viewed Trump as wanting to negotiate some sort of deal right away. So Putin is trying to increase whatever leverage he has to get a better deal at the negotiating table. And one way to go about doing that is increasing strikes. Nonetheless, whatever the cause or the rationale is here, you can see a clear spike in Russian drone attacks against Ukraine, which means that this cutting off of air defense assets and other munitions is a big problem for Ukraine in the very near term. Politico yesterday reported, quote, "The Pentagon has halted shipments of some air defense missiles and other precision munitions to Ukraine due to worries that U.S. weapons stockpiles have fallen too low." They say the decision was driven by the Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, and was made after a review of Pentagon munitions stockpiles, leading to concerns that the total number of artillery rounds, air defense missiles, and precision munitions was sinking, according to 3 people familiar with the issue. The initial decision to withhold some aid promised during the Biden administration came in early June, but it is only taking effect now as Ukraine is beating back some of the largest Russian barrages of missiles and drones at civilian targets in Kyiv and elsewhere. They say the Pentagon did not respond to a request for comment in the article. We do have a couple of statements worth running through here. White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly said the decision was, quote, "made to put America's interests first, following a DoD review of our nation's military support and assistance to other countries across the globe. The strength of the United States Armed Forces remains unquestioned. Just ask Iran." And they say that included in the list of items that are being pulled back, Patriot air or missiles for the Patriot air defense system or interceptors, precision artillery rounds, Hellfire, and other missiles that Ukraine launches from its F-16s, fighters, and drones, adding that the losses will surely be felt on the ground as Ukraine continues to beat back fresh Russian assaults. Now, a couple added notes here. There's the possibility that this move is not legal and might get overruled. Looking back to 2019, there was a similar situation where President Trump shut off military aid to Ukraine, and the Government Accountability Office at the time ruled that the move violated the Impoundment Control Act because policy disagreements are not a lawful reason to block appropriated funds. So maybe, right? Maybe this ends up not being a big thing, but either way, whether these funds actually end up getting released or not, the writing is on the wall, and it's been there for some time. There is no indication that the United States is planning to put together any additional military aid packages to Ukraine. It'd be nice if this stuff went through that we have already promised, but even if this does, I don't know that there's anything coming after this, and something we've talked about for quite a while. Now, Elbridge Colby, the man who made this decision, supposedly put out a statement saying, quote, "DoD continues to provide the president with robust options to continue military aid to Ukraine, consistent with his goal of bringing this tragic war to an end." A random side note, I actually had no idea who Elbridge Colby was at all. Never heard the name before. Then he started quote tweeting me about a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. I was at NATO, at the NATO summit, and we asked Admiral Bauer just some silly internet humor, asked him if he knew what NAFO was. And it was just a funny little 15-second clip. And Colby took that and was like, this is CIA deep state funded. Like, they're internet cartoon dogs. And he went deep on that one. It was a little bit unhinged, to say the least. Nonetheless, that's now the man making decisions to cut off air defense assets to Ukraine. Turning to some Russian assessments here, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, said, quote, as far as we understand, the reasons behind this move were empty warehouses, as well as the lack of arms in these warehouses. But in any case, the fewer arms supplied to Ukraine, the closer the end of the special military operation will be. Remember, Russia still doesn't call it a war, but no doubt the Kremlin sees this as, every time that there's been a possibility of a ceasefire, remember, Ukraine will accept the terms of a ceasefire, and then Russia will say, right, but here's our additional terms. Russia's terms are always that military aid stops to Ukraine. They view that as the clearest path towards a military victory in this conflict. Russian mill blogger Fighter Bomber said, quote, of course, even a small pause in the supply of weapons will reduce the defensive and offensive potential of the Ukrainians. It is clear that in the conditions of our troops' advance, even a small pause can cost Ukraine both the loss of territories and additional destroyed military targets in the rear. And it would be logical for our armed forces to use this window in our interests. I would be shocked. If we look at that graph, we have 5,337 drone strikes carried out. Again, these are the long-range drones, Shahed-style drones. This is not talking about the ones up front, the little FPV-style drones. Those are in the tens of thousands, if not higher, each month. It's a shocking number. These are the essentially cruise missiles is the best way to look at these. I would be shocked if that number doesn't increase. This is an opening for Putin to take advantage of a lack of air defense assets in Ukraine to whittle down further the available interceptors that Zelensky and Ukraine have at their disposal. Expect those strikes to jump up significantly in the next couple weeks. Now, a couple key notes here. First off, as mentioned previously, there's no additional U.S. aid planned, military aid planned to Ukraine. There's no suggestion that that's on the table anytime soon. Congress is dealing with a lot of other things. Ukraine is not even, if I'm being honest, it's not even entering the conversation. Just, it's rare that Ukraine or Russia is a top 10, let alone top 5 issue for Congress right now. So it's not clear that anything else is coming either way. Our European allies do have the ability to ramp up the production in some senses, definitely of their own domestically manufactured equipment. I believe Germany has the ability to, I don't know what the contract looks like, but I think Germany does produce Patriot interceptors, so that's a possibility there. Bottom line, Europe is going to be able to help in some areas, but not all. Now, one of the arguments that we're seeing framed here, and it was very similar in how Secretary Hegseth a few weeks ago moved assets that were set aside for Ukraine, fuses for rockets, and said, no, we're going to move these to CENTCOM because they help intercept drones because there's an immediate threat there for our personnel. That turned out to be accurate, right? This was just before Israel launched their attack into Iran, and there was speculation that Iran might hit U.S. bases, and then the U.S. got directly involved, and we were waiting to see what they actually hit. That was responding to a direct threat. That argument is going to be very hard for anybody in the United States to push back against. It's not exactly what Elbridge Colby is making here, but you're not going to find anybody with any power in the United States effectively making the argument that they would rather protect Ukrainians than Americans. So the minute that it is framed in that sense of we have to have this thing to protect our service members, it's as long as that is accurate, or at least somewhat provable, that's not something that's going to be overcome here in the U.S. Now, when looking at the difference here, and I think this is notable, it's kind of like we have to walk this line without having all the information, which probably means there's just going to be strong opinions in every direction, and I will share mine here in a moment. When Secretary Hegseth moved the equipment set aside for Ukraine to CENTCOM, there is a very real, direct, and immediate threat to the lives of U.S. service members. The way that Colby is framing this is that, hey, that stuff that we are going to send to Ukraine down the road might be necessary if we get into a future conflict, possibly down the road with China. Maybe we would need that stuff. So it's all hypotheticals. I don't like that as much. Again, we don't know the details of what munitions we have on hand and what we're short exactly. That's classified information. But I don't know, it feels like the GBU-57 conversation. Those are the bunker busters, the massive ordnance penetrators we use to hit Fordo. One of the arguments people made against using those was, hey, we only have like 20 of those in our arsenal, publicly available, at least 20, maybe 30. So we can't use very many of these. And I made the statement, like, this is what it's for. This is the ideal target. This is what these weapons were designed to do. Use them all if we have to use them all. And we used 14 out of, 20, 25, 30. The weapons are there for a reason. And in this case, I would argue that, again, there's a line to walk here. We don't want to run ourselves to zero and leave our troops and our interests completely undefended. But, there is a very active war ongoing right now in Europe that is a U.S. ally against a U.S. adversary. I think we're at risk of brushing that one aside for the possibility of a maybe conflict down the road at the predetermined point that may or may not happen. That doesn't quite feel right. I should also mention that some are presenting this as a U.S. pause to leverage to get Ukraine to negotiate. We have done that in the past. Nobody that I've seen is suggesting that now. So there's no one in the administration saying, yeah, maybe we'll turn it back on or we will send these if Ukraine comes to the negotiating table. So this doesn't seem like a part of that at all. This just seems like an entire stop it all. We're going to keep it. We need it for the future war with China. Now, there's an interesting report. We got some Ukrainian strikes, deep strikes we're going to get into here in a second, but there's an interesting report I wanted to hit on, put forward by the Center for Human Rights and Armed Conflict about do you remember back in July 2022, there were Ukrainian prisoners, about 170 Ukrainian prisoners being held in what's referred to as Barracks 200 in a Russian-occupied portion of Ukraine early in the war, and it blew up. And Russia immediately was like, this is Ukraine. Ukraine they hit their own forces with HIMARS because they don't want their people to surrender or something along those lines. Nonetheless, we've got this new investigation that just wrapped up and said, yeah, that was Russia. We can prove it. And it was a false flag to try to blame it on Ukraine. So the Center for Human Rights and Armed Conflict, I'll link this full report in the description below. I think it's an important one to read through, especially if you're interested in this. They say investigators found that it was Russian-made artillery, not Ukrainian HIMARS rockets. The exact rounds were two 120 thermal barrack shells fired from a Russian 2S9 Nona. They say a Russian crew 2 to 8 kilometers east of the prison fired 2 low-power practice shells to range in. About a minute later, they launched 2 live thermal barrack shells. One smashed through the roof, another hit near the front gate, setting the building ablaze. They say the report says that the operation was planned from the top down. There was so much done right out the gate in terms of the cover-up that this is not something that could have happened from the bottom and people kind of figuring it out as they went and figuring out ways to shut it down. It was top-down driven. They also add that the Wagner Group, while active in the region at the time, may have been involved to a degree, but this was not their decision, nor was it the decision of local separatists. And then kind of wrapping up here, they say independent evidence points squarely at Russian forces using their own thermal barrack artillery to kill Ukrainian POWs, then blaming Ukraine. Much of the hard proof, witness accounts, blast forensics, unanswered Russian files still waits to be fully exploited. That's one key note here is some of those survivors have now been returned to Ukraine in prisoner swaps. So again, 170 people, 40 killed, 130 wounded. And some of those individual accounts talk about artillery going off nearby and where the blast happened, and they're starting to piece it together. And it looks like right now, from all the information we have, that was a Russian operation, a war crime, straight up, to shell a group of defenseless prisoners of war, but then a false flag as well, trying to shift that blame. If you remember right out the gate, they started presenting fragments of HIMARS rockets saying, look, it must have been a HIMARS because here's this fragment. But even at the time, there's a lot of evidence pushing against that, and now we have the confirmation. Now, Ukraine has continued to carry out their deep strikes inside of Russian territory, and there's 3 worth getting into here. The first one in Luhansk, where massive fire spread throughout this strike, and Russia actually confirmed that the commander of the 8th Guards Army, Colonel Guryashkin, was killed in this strike. So Russian confirmation of one of their senior leaders eliminated in that strike. It sounds like it was against their headquarters facility, so not sure if he was targeted specifically or just happened to be in the headquarters. And it's always, in the military, it's always good to take out an enemy's headquarters. So maybe Ukraine got lucky that he was there, or maybe they knew he was going to be there and he was a part of that target package. Another interesting one here, pretty deep inside of Russian territory. And again, this is being confirmed by Russian sources. They say the Izhevsk, oh man, there's no way I'm saying that right, electromechanical plant was reportedly hit a couple days ago. We've got footage of these drones flying in. It does look like a slightly modified Ukrainian drone here. Again, Russian sources say, according to preliminary data, 3 people were killed and 20 injured in the strike. In addition, a fire broke out on the territory, and the footage of the smoke has appeared online. The plant is part of the Almaz Anti concern and specializes in the production of short-range air defense systems, including well-known for Tor SAM systems. In addition, the plant also manufactures onboard equipment for surface-to-air missiles. The military production facility. That's coming from Russian channels saying like, yeah, this is what they hit. And we see some of the footage. Clearly, it was some sort of industrial facility. They note that the plant is located 1,300 kilometers from the border of Ukraine. That's a deep strike, really deep. That's a long ways inside of Russian territory. They say the strike on it demonstrates the both real capabilities of the adversary and the vulnerabilities of strategically important enterprises, the protection of which requires specific measures that have been voiced many times before. So again, there are so many targets spread across Russia like this one facility, and it's, no doubt it's not the only one, but it is a facility churning out some of these short-range air defense assets. It needs air defense itself around it to protect it, or else it's going to get hit 1,300 kilometers away by Ukrainian drones, and clearly did some degree of damage. Now, the Russians reported here that this appears to have been carried out by a Ukrainian Luty drone, L-U-T-Y. They say this is a heavy kamikaze drone that can carry a warhead weighing up to 75 kilograms over a distance up to 1,000 kilometers, or I guess 1,300 kilometers, right? They say the device is equipped with a gasoline engine of about 50 horsepower with a pushed propeller and a body made using fiberglass, metal mesh, and plywood. So we are seeing, we talked about this a couple days ago. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense said they've got tens of thousands of these long-range drones, and they are going to continue striking targets all across Russia and ramp up those strikes as we move forward. We also saw the Ukrainian GUR talk about some additional strikes in Crimea, and there's a couple pieces here. First off, we do have some satellite imagery showing a couple days ago they announced that they struck an airfield, destroying a Pantsir air defense system and 3 helicopters. We did not get any drone footage from that. We didn't get any Russians leaking on the ground footage of flames or explosions, anything like that. But new satellite imagery does appear to show that some items previously seen on that runway were burned out. Those charred marks on the runway. So likely something was hit. Just a drone detonating there would not do anything. I mean, technically, if there was a fuel truck right there, maybe it would leave something similar, but those look like platforms for aircraft. Now, additionally, we did get some actual footage coming from the GUR here as well, showing that they carried out additional strikes into Crimea, and they're putting this type of footage out every couple weeks now. It's pretty common. They say in this video, they show the successful defeat of the Pantsir S-1 air defense system, along with the crew, the Nyobium SV radar, the coastal radar Pechora 3, and the radar Provnik GE, as well as a Russian Su-30 fighter at the airfield in Saki. So again, across the board, Ukraine is really keeping up the pressure with these long-range drone strikes, not just against airfields, as we've seen a couple times now in recent weeks, but also against assets belonging to or contributing to the Russian war machine and the Russian military-industrial complex. So, look, big thing to keep an eye on here in the coming days is what is the increase, or there will be an increase in Russian attacks against Ukraine. How significant is that, and what sort of air defense assets does Ukraine still have on hand to, quite frankly, protect their citizens and allow their country to stay in the fight and continue to defend their land even longer? But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.